Hi, good morning. It is great to follow a panel like that. I thought those guys had a lot to say. I'm up here to introduce the next panel, which is on the topic of from innovation to deployment. And I've been a business person for 30 years and an investor. And I've been involved in every one of those stages from innovation to deployment. And I'd like to start by recalling a great Canadian, Wayne Gretzky, who said that the reason he was the greatest hockey player in the world was because he went to where the puck was going to go, not where the puck was. And that's really what we're here to talk about, and that's really what American business does, is to anticipate what's going to happen and to go to where the puck is going to be, not to where it is. From innovation to deployment. That's what American business has to do to transform our energy economy. We really need to move to a research-based, is that better? Yeah. We really need to move to a research-based, innovation-based economy from an extractive one. And if we do that, we're going to be richer, we're going to have many more jobs, and we will deal naturally and without even thinking about it with our energy and climate problems. I think the biggest thing to remember in this situation is that we have done this before. We all were alive, looking at this room, I think everybody here was alive for acid rain and fluorocarbons. The United States has actually had a cap and trade system which was used to spur innovation, and it spurred it more effectively, cheaper, faster than anybody anticipated, and the results were better than if nothing had ever happened. So what we're talking about here is not a new problem. The scale is different. This is not the oldest business in the world. I think in Las Vegas, we can all remember what that is. This is the largest business in the world. And therefore, it seems more daunting. But in fact, the need to control pollution, the need to include the costs of pollution is something that we've done successfully before, and we will inevitably do successfully this time. From innovation to deployment is what businesses do. What's not included in that description is what government does to enable that. And what government does and has to do is to have a clear, simple, and fixed framework. Look, I've been an investor. When you think about investment, you think about multiple years. You think about substantial sums of money to you. So if you're a venture capitalist, the numbers may look small, but they're really important to you. If you're running a big bond house, the numbers are really huge and they're important to you. If you think about the impact of good government decisions on business, just think about the difference between Argentina and Singapore. It's incredibly important that the framework be right so that the process from innovation to deployment has the right input so business people make the right decisions. And honestly, and I'm sitting here listening to a bunch of elected officials and government officials talking about what we're doing in energy, and we are doing a lot of good things in energy at the state level, at the federal level, at the municipal level. But if you look at them, I mean, we're doing energy efficiency, we're doing ITCs, we're doing RPSs, we're doing miles per gallon changes. They're all good. They're all effective. We are making progress. But the honest truth is, even taken all together, they're not good enough. Because what we're really ending up with is a bunch of very good solutions to separate problems that are mandated from the top, and we're having a lot of difficulty in this system, from my point of view, comparing between the solutions. I mean, people will ask me, as an investor, you know, is the electric car going to work? And I'll say, I have no idea, and I don't even want to know. I want a system that's clear, simple, and fixed, so American consumers and American businesses can answer that question. When we did this in telecommunications, when we did a system-wide change, in 17 years, we completely changed everything. It's not, you can't even see it as the same system. That's what we need to do. And let me say this, in the West, we are being progressive. Nevada is second in geothermal and solar. In California, we have a comprehensive system of laws to try and attack energy and climate. We'll see exactly how they work. And the other states that border the Pacific Ocean, Washington and Oregon, are very serious, are committed to profound energy progress. So there is a nascent Western movement. We'll see what really happens with it. But if you took just the states that border the Pacific Ocean and the RGGI states, that's 32% of the American economy. If that group were committed to one carbon market, that would be an amazing first step towards moving to a national policy, and it would be a real help to getting Senator Reid and the other people in Washington, D.C. along the way to the kind of simple, clear, and fixed system that we're ultimately going to need. So if our generational challenge is energy and climate, and I wholeheartedly believe it's our generational challenge to attack this problem and systematically defeat it, then the answer is going to be American business. It's going to be what you hear, from innovation to deployment. But the need is for clear rules and a simple framework that includes all the costs. And the Gordian knot of this problem is American politics. So I believe once we have the fixed rules, we will get the distributed solutions that the panel's going to address. I believe that American democracy and American business have always succeeded, and we need them to succeed together here. And then the result will be global leadership in a low-carbon advanced energy future. And then we will succeed on climate change almost, by the by, without thinking about it again. So now I'm going to turn it over to the head of the next panel, Phyllis Catino from the Pew Clean Energy Program. And these people are amazing. This is a really good conference. I've been incredibly impressed and wanted to thank Senator Reid and Cap for doing this. Thank you very much.
Well, let's see. Oh, good, it's on.
Good start.
Right, good start. Exactly. Well, good morning. It's fantastic to be here. I want to add my name to the chorus of folks who have thanked the Majority Leader, CAP, the Clean Energy Project, MGM Resorts, and UNLV for putting on this conference. I'm pleased to be here. I know all my panelists are as well. Again, I'm Phyllis Catino, and I direct the Clean Energy Project at the Pew Charitable Trust. And this is going to be a fantastic panel. Thanks to Tom Steyer for really setting the stage for what we need to move from innovation to deployment, which we do believe is a big piece of that is policy certainty. And at Pew, we've spent the last several years really chronicling trends and investment in the global clean energy economy and talking to business leaders in the clean energy sector. And what they will tell you is innovation, manufacturing, and deployment are not separate points on a spectrum, but they're part of a cycle. And that here in the United States, we lead clearly when it comes to innovation. You just look at patent filings or R&D or VC investments. We lead the world in innovation. But we are lagging behind when it comes to manufacture and deployment. And so this panel today is going to try and get to the crux of the matter about why that is and how we can fix that and how critically important it is that we do. So I'm joined here today. I think I'm going to start here at the far end, if I could. Ethan Zindler is the head of policy analysis for Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and he's responsible for managing and expanding the coverage of key global policy developments. He also manages the firm's research for the Americas, and I'm very pleased. I work closely with Ethan on our research because BNEF is our research partner. And of course, Lisa Jackson, the administrator, needs no introduction. She is now the environmental director of Apple Inc., but she joined Apple after leading the EPA from 2009 to 2013 with many successes, from fuel efficiency to directing the the EPA's response to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, to authorizing carbon dioxide as a public health threat, among many other things. So fantastic. Thank you for doing that. And of course, we have Dr. Arathi Prabhakar. I get that right? Okay. She's the director of the Defense Advanced Research Agency, DARPA. In addition to her national security service, she was a partner in U.S. Venture Partners, working in, among other things, energy and efficiency technologies. And she also chaired the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Advisories Committee for the Department of Energy. And sadly, she is going to be not speaking to us today from her national security experience at DARPA. We all want to know what's going on there, I know. But she's going to talk to us about her from a former hat, from her innovation and investment experience. Matthew Norden is the vice president of Venrock. In this role, he's focused on energy for one of the oldest and best performing VC funds. It was actually the venture capital arm of the Rockefeller family, with currently $2.5 billion under management and practices. And he also co-founded Lux Research, which is a premier analytical firm focused on energy and materials technology. And then finally, here beside me, Tom Kiernan is the CEO of AWEA, the American Wind Energy Association, and just recently been named to AWEA. I think that was in May. And he's going to bring a unique perspective to AWEA, given he's served in 3 positions in the EPA. He led the National Parks Conservation Association, and he also was an environmental consultant. So thank you to all of you. So everybody's microphone's on. I think I'm going to start with Ethan. Just to give us the size of the size and scope of the global clean energy economy, just so we know what is at stake. Give us an idea of investments in the future and where things are going and how rapidly the sector is expanding.
Okay, well, I guess, hi everybody, and thanks, Phyllis, and it's great to have you chair this panel and work with you again. So what our firm does, among other things, is track the flows of finance and investment in clean energy globally, and we've been doing this for about a decade now. And from 2004 through last year, we total amount invested in this sector had been about a bit over $1.5 trillion all told, with a very, very rapid rise from 2004, and then a bit of a leveling off, and actually a bit of decline from 2011 and into 2012. So last year, we counted just under $270 billion in new funds that were invested in clean energy. And this definition of clean energy, by the way, is renewables. It's not including gas or nuclear in that definition as well. Going forward, we do expect the market to grow. There's an interesting mix of things going on, though. The price of the equipment is going down. So as the price goes down, the dollar figures may look less impressive at times, but that's because this is getting cheaper, which is a good thing. But the volume has to go up substantially. But longer term, we think we're going to eventually end up at a $450 to $500 billion global market for clean energy internationally.
And here in the United States?
So here in the U.S., enjoyed its all-time most investment with about, I think it's approximately $65 billion in 2011. That was our high water mark, but it dropped fairly substantially into 2012. A lot of the 2011 money, private money, frankly, was to some large degree triggered by very generous stimulus programs from the federal government, which in many cases have actually expired. And so we saw an investment decline actually into 2012. There are other headwinds facing the industry as well. The 30-state renewable portfolio standards, which had been driving activity in the country, in many cases are being met, or in some cases being exceeded by local development. So the states, while very, very important, either have to up their game in terms of raising the renewable portfolio standards, or the federal government probably has to come in to create some further demand. Because while we are seeing prices of clean energy come down quite rapidly, they're not there yet in a number of cases. And so you continue to need some kind of federal subsidy to have market growth.
So, well, talking about federal subsidies or tax incentives, the production tax credit has been critically important, particularly to the wind industry in terms of driving deployment. And the expiration of the PTC and then questions about whether or not it was going to be renewed had a real impact. And talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of policy and how it drives deployment.
Great, happy to do that. Wonderful to be with you, and a perfect setup. Thank you, Phyllis and Ethan, for that. As folks know, the production tax credit had been up until 2012. We had a number of years of stability. that led for the wind industry dramatic, significant growth in the last couple of years leading up to and including 2012 of new electric generation in the country over the last 5 years. 35% of all new electric generation was wind. And the wind industry is thrilled about that, and similarly thrilled that the cost of wind in the last couple of years has dropped 30%. So as Ethan was saying, costs are coming down, growth had been occurring, and then there was the uncertainty. Was the PTC going to be extended? And what happened, because there was that uncertainty, the whole pipeline for new projects dried up. So last year in 2012, we had 13,000 megawatts of new wind deployed throughout the country. 13,000 megawatts. The first half of this year, we had 1 megawatt. Because there was uncertainty about the production tax credit, that whole pipeline dried up. We went from 13,000 to 1.6 megawatts. A huge decline that is, I would argue, extraordinarily disruptive to the industry. Now, because it was extended, the production tax credit, and it included the start construction language, the industry started getting it going again. We've got 1,300 megawatts under construction, a whole bunch of PPAs, about 3,500 megawatts of PPAs have been signed, so it's coming back. But that lack of predictability in the policy environment is harming our ability to continue bringing the cost down. So as far as getting from innovation to deployment, we need a predictable policy framework to succeed. And I will say, I think when you look at that cost curve, we can definitely see the point at which wind can compete without a subsidy in the long term with every other source out there. And we look forward to being in that place, but we need a predictable PTC, ITC going forward so we can make the R&D investments and get there.
Okay, so that would require Congress to extend the PTC. But let's talk about the President's new Climate Action Plan. Administrator Jackson, President Obama has signaled that his intention to cap emissions from power plants. And just wondering, is this going to result in a new utility business model that's going to really encourage the deployment of more renewables?
Well, thanks, Phyllis. And I got my first name back now, so you can
Okay.
call me Lisa.
Lisa. Okay.
Pretty please. Listen, I think the president's actions, as usual, are designed to send a strong signal that we're in this clean energy game for the long term. After all, that's what business needs. I now wear the business hat. I'm proud to work for Apple. And I think what businesses are looking for, in addition to knowing that it's the right thing to do, and it gives us some amount of assurance that we have reliability, especially in a field like ours, where we want to make sure our data centers, which are 100% renewable, Apple's data centers are 100% additional new renewable to the grid. That's all important to us, but you can't take that out of the policy context. So, of course, I'm a little biased, but the president's leadership, his calling upon all the executive agencies, and certainly the EPA, to do what they can to give a really clear signal about where the country's moving in terms of cleaner forms of energy, in terms of addressing climate pollution, his standing behind the science, are all extraordinarily important.
And in terms of government action, particularly at the federal level, we heard from the governors talking about public-private partnerships and the role that federal government needs to play in really spurring that, driving innovation and deployment. And are programs like ARPA-E, like the Energy Frontier Hubs, like the Clean Energy, DOE's Clean Energy Manufacturing Initiative, are they really critical to enabling those partnerships? And kind of how do you see them kind of moving forward? How important will they be?
Yeah, thanks, Phyllis. I think the programs that you've mentioned are really great examples of one part of the equation, and very much, as you highlighted at the beginning of this session, I think they are really making sure that we continue to be good at the thing that we know we are strong at, which is the innovation front end of this whole process. And I think the challenge that everyone's grappling with is the second half of the equation, which is how do we turn that innovation leadership critical that we keep driving it, because I never want to take that for granted. But then the next part of the question is, how do we turn that into the scale deployment of these technologies? And sort of stepping back for a moment from all the comments that people are making about what happened in the last year and what's happening with tax credits, specific actions, really, if you think about what is going on today, we're in the middle of this massive transformation in our energy systems. We've been through these before. It's not the first time. These are generational shifts as we go from, it wasn't always the case that we depended on the current energy mix that we have. Now we're trying to drive to a very different mix. And it's, these are places where we simply aren't going to meet our national or our global needs without public and private cooperation. But when I step back, what I see is our system, phase one has been this thing that we've been pushing a boulder up a very steep mountain. And that it's because that kind of infrastructure shift is very hard. But that has meant that we've been completely reliant on subsidies and mandates to get as far as we have gotten. We had to do that. That's the only way we were going to get started. But what I think we're all driving towards is getting to the top of that mountain and then having gravity in the form of real market drivers, so that the future that really allows us to scale these new energy solutions is driven by market economics. And I think we do a good job of beating ourselves up in this country about the struggles we have aligning policy and having stable, predictable policies. I'll tell you, when we get to that place when market drivers are what's moving this whole field forward, there's no one on the planet that knows how to do that better than the United States does. And when that kicks in, I think, that's going to be our game again. So I want to make sure we do everything we can, public and private, to get through this gap. But we know how to put capital to work. We know how to build industries. That's something that our market-based economy is phenomenal at.
Can I just jump in a quick one on that, just to say from wind industry's perspective, the R&D funding that has come was involved in virtually every advancement in the wind industry, whether it's longer blades, taller towers, better turbines. The R&D funding was there to help make that cost curve come down in a number of years. So those investments are playing out in improving the cost structure.
Well, maybe Matthew, I can ask you on driving down the cost of technologies. We have seen this dramatic price decline in technologies, but is the next frontier in doing that, is it soft costs? Is it kind of marketing and finance and other things, or are you going to just continue to see it in terms of technology?
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of factors at work here, right? A great example would be solar, where we have a tremendous amount of solar deployment in this country. We have, some real national champions in the form of companies like First Solar that have been extraordinary at innovating in a field by doing things that others haven't. And that game has now moved. There is a floor price for solar modules. People argue about what it is, but if you just add up the commodity costs of everything that goes into the module, it's easy to see how you start to asymptote toward a floor. There are two places you go from there. One of them is not really about hard technology innovation. It's not about ARPA-E-backed projects. It's not about things that are coming out of Stanford or MIT. It's about just being able to package technologies we have today together better. And probably the frontier of that in solar would be in base loading solar and attaching batteries to solar panels, not having two inverters but having one, getting the civil works costs down so that you can get solar power that you can at least smooth out over the day and fill in the bumps when clouds go over the sun. There then is a completely different frontier that is the one, as an early stage venture investor, I am worried about, which is what comes next. So, there are several ways you can take light, turn it into power, right? There's the thermal route. You heat up water, you make steam, you turn a turbine. That's proven to be very expensive. There's the photovoltaic route, which is how the world has pursued solar to date. But there are other ways, like being able to use beams of light to cause an antenna to resonate and tune in power, the same way that your car's antenna tunes in a radio station. Why would you want to do that? Well, it's subject to different efficiency limits. You can't get better than 30-odd% efficiency in today's existing PV in one junction. But with these new technologies, the efficiency limits are far higher, 80, 90%. No one is building companies around those technologies because although we have an extraordinary amount of R&D spending, right? Tons of money at ARPA-E, 285 projects, it's only 10% of what the DOE does. And we have an enormous amount of asset finance. hundreds of millions of dollars waiting to go third or fourth for something that is proven, right? Bankable, can put it out in the field, we'll know how it will perform. We have a giant sucking sound when it comes to the money that entrepreneurs take, or scientists or engineers who are willing to risk their careers to go out and do something crazy and build a company that, like First Solar, could be a national champion. And my fear is that we're going to lose a generation of innovation ready to come out of labs, ready to come out of ARPA-E, because no one will be willing to go first.
Well, now, you're a VC investor. What's the answer?
That is a great question.
That's the problem.
Our challenge is finding friends. We have 9 active companies in our energy portfolio. They range really widely from nuclear fusion to algae-based biocrude fuels to new ways of converting waste heat into electricity. But there are a small number of partners that can form syndicates that give these companies the financing they need to be able to go from idea to pilot stage to having a demonstration that produces data. Then there's a whole other frontier, that goes from tens of millions of dollars to hundreds of millions of dollars that you need to build the first plant or to do the first large-scale deployment. I think we are increasingly looking, unfortunately, I wish it weren't this way, away from the US. Because in companies like these that have these next-generation extraordinary solutions to global problems that aren't going away, we make the rounds to large US investment funds, to big US corporations, and we get a lot of, call me once you've built a big one. But when you have that conversation with Southeast Asian sovereign funds, with large Chinese corporations, with kingdoms that have been built on extraction, who recognize that it doesn't matter if it's 20 or 50 or 100 years, at some point the extraction stops. They are far more far-reaching in their thinking than we are in this country.
Could
Well,
I chime in
yeah.
on that point? I think Matthew's talking about something that's really critical. And 2 points that I would amplify. One is that anytime we talk, I think we tend to lump all of financing into one bin, but of course it's radically different whether you're doing venture investing at the early stage where you have a very high risk profile, you're reaching for huge gains, you're completely willing to take high technical risk because it might give you a huge return. Very different than asset finance, which has to be based on a completely proven technology because your upside is you get 6% or whatever, right? And you're not allowed to have any downside. So I think it's thinking of it as a complete system of financing, and a lot of the work that Bloomberg has done in this area, just showing the different kinds of finance, I think has been very, very constructive. None of that works unless all the pieces are in sync. And what I think we're coming through a period where we had a lot of venture in the United States. The next pieces really weren't in place, and as a consequence, venture has retreated, right? I mean, we're sort of seeing a retrenchment. It played out in different ways in other parts of the world, and the role of corporations and different types of finance other than venture, I think, all of that is still getting sorted out in the United States. The upshot is, though, that in the U.S., I think we're clearly lagging if you look at the scale of deployment that has gone on in other countries. And I'm a little frustrated because I wish we'd get all this sorted out a little bit more quickly. But ultimately, we are going to have to get some kind of a balance, and I think that will come as markets develop, and venture will end up at whatever its level is. I think corporate investment is going to end up being a much bigger player than we had anticipated maybe a few years ago as well.
Well, I'm going to go ahead, Ethan, because I know you want to talk about the size of foreign markets and how they're growing, and then I really want to come back to you, Lisa, and talk about corporate investment being kind of the
I was
next
just going to
frontier.
add one quick point on this, which the so-called valley of death for these technologies, and I guess I'm somewhat of I tend to believe that it's somewhat inevitable. There's always going to be a challenge between venture investors, as you say, who will take a high risk and high return, and asset financiers, bankers who want things that are proven and safe. There's just a gap there. But in fairness to the U.S., listen, the loan guarantee program, for all its problems and challenges, that's what it intended to address. Did it do it perfectly? No, but it certainly has had some successes. And so I think it's important to note that. There are other countries, though, around the world that are starting various kinds of green banks with a real eye towards addressing this issue. And I think some of them are a bit more forward-looking. The UK has been on top of it, Australia and others. bit more forward-looking in trying to take on this challenge than the U.S. maybe is at this juncture. But in fairness to 1703, the Loan Guarantee Program, that was what it was trying to do. And I think policymakers deserve some credit for looking at that problem then.
Well, talk to us about Apple and their commitment in corporate sustainability. We've seen it here with MGM Resorts. Is corporate sustainability the kind of next frontier in deployment? And you've got a project in Reno, one in North Carolina.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about our energy projects, because I think, this is about deployment, what's actually happening on the ground. And I totally recognize the challenge from a policy perspective, but I think it's important to also recognize when things work and how they work and what that means. So Apple's data centers are 100% powered by renewables. And that's not buying credits on a market or even buying into a market that might have an RPS. That's additional new power, oftentimes Apple owned, if not direct contracts to direct access to power. That's sun, that's hydro, that's geothermal, that's wind. Our first big splash might well have been in Maiden, North Carolina, where we have a data center that has, I think it's 167 million kilowatt hours a year when we finish our second array. It's the largest non-solar utility array, we think anywhere, but certainly in the United States. And it's backed up by fuel cells, which run on biogas. So we feel pretty good about that situation. Then we moved to Lyon County in Nevada, and we've just announced that our data center here will be powered by a combination of solar. And while we're building the solar, we're actually accessing directly geothermal project. What I love about the project here is that we really are a partner to NV Energy, which is the utility. It's their land, but we're building, we're actually constructing it. It was pretty interesting to see these wonderful engineers. I'm a chemical engineer, so electrical types always intimidate me a bit, but here they are asking Apple to bring our expertise in this area to bear to help get it built and get it built right, to make sure it serves our needs. It's going to satisfy our needs here and probably with some left over, because our belief is that, our approach is that we're building power for our needs. But we're also making sure two things, that it's additional, it's probably going to be some left over. NV Energy is going to have the option to buy this array in a couple of years. But we also want to make sure that in doing that we're creating jobs, and we're not. We have a green tariff here that ensures, we're the first ones to use it in Nevada, that the ratepayers here are not going to pay to construct the solar farm. So we're getting one into the grid. It's going to be new. It's going to displace fossil for sure. And we're going to be accountable. We're using the Western regions to account for the greenhouse gas emissions.
So what are the conditions in states in terms of policy or even market conditions that make you select a certain location?
Well, there are business reasons for where we're building what we're building. So I'm not going to talk about those. But we're looking, once we know we have a data center, our global energy manager is sitting here, Mike Peterhoff, but what he's then going to do is look to see how Apple's going to power that. And he's got a 100% success rate, right? Apple's got a 100% success rate in doing that. And he's looking, it's kind of interesting here in Nevada, for instance, we're looking at a different type of solar array than in North Carolina because we have DNI, direct natural irradiance here, that allows us to get a different level of efficiency from the array that we have here. So it's looking at the natural resources, if you will. Here it's certainly solar and geothermal, which are going to power our system. But it's, in Prineville, I think we have wind energy in Prineville, Oregon, and in North Carolina, because one of the cool things is looking at the data center there, it's not just solar, but the fuel cells. We're in agricultural North Carolina, we can get biogas. So you sort of look at what's available. And of course, the partnership here with the utility is huge for us. It means that from a regulatory perspective, we have certainty, but it also means that I think it's a pretty forward-looking utility that recognizes that there's no reason to compete. Instead, let's find a way to do this, and we're grateful for that.
Can I put an exclamation point on where you're going, and that is, for pursuing innovation and deployment, how important the state work is and getting the policies and all the issues at the state level dealt with. We were talking earlier more at the federal level, et cetera. That's important. But at the state level, I think, shout out is appropriate here in Nevada with the 2 bills passed this last year, that one of which improved the RPS by kind of dealing with some of the loopholes there. Another one, NV Vision, that was working on the long-term strategy for increasing renewables. And phasing out coal. There was also a lot of work by the PUC in improving transmission access for renewables in the state. That kind of policy level and work at the PUC level, working on transmission lines, et cetera, I think hugely important and helpful to whether it's corporate purchasers or others in getting renewables out there and kind of deploying it. You've got to have the right federal policies and the right state level policies as well.
So in talking about kind of utilities and utilities as partner and having the right model, just want to ask everybody on the panel, you can't be in the clean energy sector and not hear a whole lot all the time about cheap and plentiful natural gas. And so Ethan's boss, Michael Bloomberg, he likes to say that natural gas and renewables are not antagonists, they are allies. And just wondering if everybody on the panel would agree with that statement. Are natural gas and renewables allies?
Well, I think there are a couple of things we have to bear in mind. One of them is certainly if you're going to combust something from a CO2 perspective, it's a lot better to combust. In fact, it's 2 times better to combust natural gas than it is coal, right? I think on the other hand, one of the challenges of having commodity price swings is that you get a universe of pundits who have seen them exactly once, and who, the same way that my dog thinks when I come home that I'm now home forever. And when I leave, I'm leaving forever. They can think, wow, it's $4 to $5 a million BTU, maybe that exists forever. I think we've seen over time that as the price of a input decreases, people find other ways to use that input. And between the, exports of natural gas, where the applications that are currently on file to export natural gas from the U.S. equal, if they were all approved, the entirety of proven shale resources in the country, if we exported all of it, to the fact that you now have large chemical companies, the Dows and DuPonts of the world, who are building new facilities that they've dusted off from a decade or 2 ago when gas was also at $4 to $5 a million BTU, to start using gas as the feedstock for plastic production rather than petroleum. It's hard to look at that and to think that you live in a very low gas price world forever. Now, as for the interim period, 5 years, 10 years, I think it's hard to tell.
Anybody else?
Yeah, well, I think they're best frenemies forever, I think is the right, they are going to be, the 2 of them are at odds in some, particularly the wind sector, because they really go head to head when it comes to competing for power purchase agreements for large utility scale generation. And if we're honest, the low price of gas, combined with the stuff Tom was talking about earlier, which is the sort of front loading of development of U.S. wind into last year because of the PTC, and combined with the renewable portfolio standards not being the drivers that they are, it's kind of the 3 things are making it tough on the wind industry. And I think that gas is a challenge in the short run. Our view is we think the prices will rise. The Energy Information Administration thinks so too. But I think Matt's point is very well taken. People think, okay, I think today it's like $3.30. That's what it's going to be forever. But they start to discount the fact that we just don't know what it's going to be, right? And there is a cost to that uncertainty, and people start to forget about that. Simply just don't know. So, gas is truly going to be challenging, but there are some certain advantages as well. The ramp on and ramp off capacity of wind, of gas pairs nicely with other sources of generation, offers that opportunity. I also say that for distributed solar, it's not quite a kind of as nearly clear head-to-head kind of competition. For distributed solar, for putting panels on the roof of your house, you've got to simply offset the local retail electricity price, which is higher than the wholesale price. And in that case, we're already seeing markets where solar does economically make sense in parts of the world and parts of the United States. If you have high enough priced retail electricity, and/or you have a terrific solar, amount of sun in where you live, the economics can work right now. And in fact, Matt was talking a little bit earlier about the costs, and Phyllis was asking about the soft costs. we haven't even really in the US begun to really enjoy the true benefit of the low technology costs of PV because solar in the United States is much more expensive than it is in Germany. It is literally twice as expensive in terms of a small system often as it is Germany because of the issue of the soft cost of installation, because we are a small market compared to Germany. We just haven't done as much. We have not enjoyed the benefits of the economies of scale that they have. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Sorry, I've digressed away from gas, but the point being that we're very bullish in the long term about distributed solar, in part because it won't have to compete with natural gas. It's a different ballgame for them.
Okay. Well, let me get kind of along with this theme of competition and global competition, because it's clear that the industry, one of the, there's policy uncertainty, which is an overriding impediment, and then there is fierce international competition and, tight access to credit. But let's talk about that fierce competition, because we've talked a little bit about policy, which is now, Arthur, you have said in the past that you think clean energy is kind of coming of age differently. It's in a different kind of phenomenon. It's a whole industrial sector that is coming of age globally, which is different from perhaps what we've seen in the past. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, of course I agree because you're quoting me. But here's what I think about. As Americans working on technology, for so many decades we've been able to take for granted the notion that we're going to have the leading edge research in our universities and labs. And then we are going to start businesses, startups or existing companies are going to start new lines of business. And they'll be pursuing markets that are, by and large, American markets. And that as industries mature, well, then eventually they'll globalize. And then, then we'll have to deal with global competition, but there will be global markets that open up, and that's all good. So that's what's happened with civilian aerospace. That's what's happened with automobiles. That's what's happened with semiconductors and computing. It's just something we've been marvelously used to and loved, and we've gotten so many advantages from it. Now comes clean energy and this enormous new market that is happening globally. And in many cases, we are still the innovation leader, not exclusively anymore. But increasingly, we see, just as Matthew was saying, we see companies that are started that may start in the United States but find their early capital for pilot plants from foreign sources. And one company after another that we've all seen will start, but when they need to build their first facility, they're sort of struggling to get anyone in the United States to finance it or help them. And other countries are showing up with capital and a complete package and just turn the switch and you're ready to roll. And it's very, very attractive. And the consequence of all of that is, and I should also add that markets, of course, are inherently global in this kind of business. China is building an enormous amount of new energy capacity. They're a leader in clean energy, but also a leader in new energy capacity of all sorts. So when you look at that landscape, today we're in a place that's very different than what we've gotten used to, and it means that we sometimes see our great basic research from university labs going on a fast track to a place where it's going to create jobs and address markets that we don't benefit from. And good for the whole world, terrific for the whole world, but how do we get what we need for U.S. interests, I think is a challenge we just have to be very clear-eyed about and not take for granted what we had seen in many previous generations.
Can I just make maybe just disagree slightly in the sense that I would, this is a big broad generalization, but I would say that we've seen technologies developed here and then scaled in other countries, particularly China, but I can't think of really one or two examples of a technology where the technology has made major advancements after leaving this country. In other words, they simply, the Chinese, particularly when it comes to PV and to wind, they've simply just done it at absolutely unprecedented scale. But within those, particularly those two technologies and electric vehicles, I can't think of a major innovation that's taken place overseas.
We're not in disagreement. I guess all I'm really saying is that the fruits of that innovation then turn into jobs
elsewhere, yeah.
and growth in capital, return to capital, and clean energy capacity in other parts of the world.
So is China our friend or is China our clean energy foe?
I think the answer to that is both.
Okay.
I woke up one morning and looked at our portfolio and realized that a third of the companies had become essentially Chinese. Although none of them had it in their initial business plan, the CEO never sat down saying, by God, I'm going to build a Chinese business starting right here in America. It just never happened that way. But in two cases, it was the right place to access customers and to manufacture. And in one case, there was just, far more sort of far-sighted, intent to deploy from a Chinese partner than from any peer in the U.S. or even in Western Europe.
Sorry, if I can jump in as well.
Please.
While the ownership in the wind industry, clearly there are some international companies that own a chunk of wind in the U.S. That said, the jobs it's I think 70% right now of the parts, et cetera, installed in the U.S. for the wind industry are manufactured here in the U.S. So at least wind in particular, I think we've got 80,000 employees, 550 facilities throughout the country, building turbines and parts and doing the operations and maintenance, et cetera. So while there's a lot to what you said, at the end of the day, for wind at least, it's generating jobs, well-paying jobs, whether it's manufacturing or a lot of the service work out in the wind farms that are here that very much benefit communities and farmers, et cetera.
And just to follow up on that, I think for wind and solar, right, that have a lot of balance of system and a lot of deployments, they really benefit from that. There are jobs that are unoutsourceable, and putting the turbine up in the Midwest that's just never going to go anywhere else. And I think there are a lot of different technologies where we benefit from that. I think there are others, particularly things that are components embedded in somebody else's product, where we will at best, right, unless we have more leadership in the corporate world and the policy world in this country, end up either licensing IP or shipping a critical component to a manufacturer who is in China or Southeast Asia. I also think that this is where shale gas and shale liquids are both a blessing and a curse. From an energy security perspective, an export perspective, jobs in the oil and gas industry, phenomenal for us. It also means that we probably take our eye off the ball in terms of what comes next. One of our portfolio companies is called Sapphire Energy. That is the largest algae to bio-crude oil maker in the world. It has a unit economic facility on 300 acres in Columbus, New Mexico, where algae take carbon dioxide out of the air, combine it with light, and make crude oil that goes into existing refineries. Their economics work at south of $80 a barrel. They have paid off, much as Tesla did, a government loan early and with interest. All these things are pointing in the right direction. However, it's really hard to see a tremendous amount of interest in deploying that kind of technology at scale in the U.S. We have a lot of options. We have shale gas and shale liquids and the Keystone Pipeline, whatever else. There are countries elsewhere in the world that will be importing our gas, right, and that will not have access to liquids out of our similar geologic formations that are going to need things like this, and they will benefit from all the downstream stuff that we get the benefit from here in wind we won't in some of these other technologies.
Well, two things quick. First, Sapphire, and this is really one for Lisa as well. I mean, Sapphire, I think, stands to benefit from the renewable fuel standard and the quotas that the EPA is generally sticking to. So I think there's an opportunity there for advanced biofuels as a requirement in the U.S. But back to your original question about China, friend or foe, I mean, I think it depends on who you ask in the value chain in the United States. So listen, let's be honest, big part of the reason why solar module prices have crashed the way they have is because China has brought on an extraordinary amount of new manufacturing capacity over there. A majority of it is now over there. And that has in turn brought down the price of the equipment. So if you're an installer, you're getting your hands on 65 cent a watt PV panels when it was $3-4 just several years ago. And that gives you a lot more opportunities when you go knock on someone's door and offer them a deal. So for the installers, China has been a very, very good friend. And now we're getting into the question of trade, right? Because one of the issues that's come up is whether you put tariffs on or not. But I think it's important. Now, if you're a manufacturer on U.S. soil, perhaps a different story. But there's not a whole lot of photovoltaic manufacture on U.S. soil, period, right now. I think we're honest about.
Now, as a clean energy advocate, I want to say I want things both ways. So I want an even playing field. I want parity in the tax code between incumbent technologies and clean energy technologies. But let's also talk about a criticism that we hear all the time, which is about picking in winners and losers. Shouldn't the United States be picking some winners? Shouldn't we be making some innovation bets that have to do with advanced manufacturing, that have to do with innovation? knowing that we probably have lost low-cost assembly to other countries? I mean, you've made bets in government, Lisa, so is that a strategy that we ought to be pursuing?
From a policy perspective, I think we're back full circle to where we started in this discussion, which is, you know, that line between R&D, advanced R&D, all the way going towards deployment. And I admit that in my current role, I'm on this end. We have to deploy, it has to be reliable, we have to know we can get it, we have to know we can source it. The 90, 100 people who are going to be installing it in Lyons County want to know that it's going to be there. Those are jobs for them. That's all really important. And I don't think we should minimize it. I know, I sort of feel this panel is wonderful because it's folks who are so cutting edge and so thinking about the innovation end. But there is a line, a pipeline that goes to deployment. And I know sometimes the time it takes for that to go from here to here feels like wasted time if you're spending a lot of time on the front end. To answer your question, I think this country has had the secret sauce on innovation for such a long time. I don't pretend to understand all of it, but I think what we have to do at a minimum, as a country, is not make it harder to make the sauce, not start taking away the funding and the tools and the energy. You know, I have a kid getting ready to go to college. I mean, kids are wanting to work in this area, think about these areas. They see the rest of it as somewhat old hat. If we mess with that, then I think we have a real problem. Whether or not, in admittedly tough budget times, we can do everything we want right now is one thing. But I think one thing the private sector can continue to do in these times is look at R&D, is look at investing in that as well.
If I could just make one last point on jobs, I had a business school professor whose favorite saying was that everything ultimately becomes a toaster. And the point being is that, you know, in a world where of mass manufacturing, everything eventually gets commoditized. And I am of the belief that that as something gets truly commoditized, it will inevitably move to China, and then from China to even lower cost countries. But there's a cycle of innovation that goes on here, and so the key is to always be manufacturing the next thing and developing that in places like the U.S. or Germany or wherever where you can keep the jobs local. So maybe it's manufacturing the capital equipment, maybe whatever it is, but you have to stay cutting edge, because if we're realistic, things get commoditized, and when they do, they don't stay here. It just doesn't happen, and I don't think it will happen.
Well, does anyone have, I'm aware of the clock, which says we have 25 seconds. Does anyone have anything to add in our 21 seconds?
The only thing I'll jump in with, agreeing with your all summary, I would just add, and this is obviously parochial and biased, so forgive me, but we have some technologies, whether it's wind and solar and others, that are so far down the road that are just about being cost competitive with gas and others for the long term. It would seem a huge waste and a loss to not continue and get those to a point where they are competing pure and simple long term. So I think there's some that we're close to getting across the goal line that just make great sense from an investment, jobs, environment, carbon, water perspective, you name it. And I think that's a great long-term goal as well.
Great. Well, I want to thank all the members of our panel for spending time today. It was an interesting discussion. Hope you all agree.